Scarecrows, made to scare crows, but do they scare you? Of course, they're always outstanding in their field, but what happens when the Scarecrow walks at midnight? Don't forget, if you like my videos, to like and subscribe. I upload every 2 weeks, sometimes more, and over 80% of you aren't subbed, so please do, it helps out. First is our original cover, another one of my favorites. The backdrop of the moon with the tattered scarecrow in the center and some mysterious red light in front of it, it's beautiful. Our tagline is, "It's a field of screams!" A clear reference to Field of Dreams. You know, the movie where ghosts play baseball in a cornfield? Yeah. Well, the back tagline is, "They're alive!" Very simple. Next will be our 2000s reprint, which is, as usual, pretty boring. No new taglines or artwork, but a nice orange slime cover. Now for the UK cover, which gives us an up-and-close personal look at the Scarecrow. This one makes it seem like some monster is just wearing the costume. What is the truth? Finally, for covers is our classic reprint, released along with Weirdo Halloween. That fits, but it would have been better with Wizard of Ooze. The connection's right there. Being a Horrorland reprint, though, we do get some bonus features. Scarecrows in history, superstitious sayings, and my favorite, the splat stats. The Scarecrow is mid at best. Pretty evil, though. This story was also made into a comic from Creepy Creatures. As with all of these, I'll display a few photos, unless there are some real differences, which I'll note under them. We even have an episode, so let's waste no more time and get to the summary. Our main characters this time are Jody and her brother Mark, 12 and 11 years old respectively. We also immediately get introduced to Stanley, the man hired to work on Jody's grandparents' farm. He's in his 40s, skinny, and not too bright, but he's a nice guy. Mom and Dad sent the kids to the farm to get a taste of the outdoors for once, especially Mark, who usually stays inside all day listening to music and playing his Game Boy. Yeah, who would do that? So there's one small issue with the farm. Jody's allergic to everything there, but she's got about 40 bottles of Benny's, so I'm sure she'll be okay. Stanley drives them to the farm, being a poor driver, hitting bumps all over and putting his hands on 11 and 1, but somehow they make it there safely. Not before passing through town. 2 miles from the farm, there's a town so small it doesn't even have a name. When they get there, Stanley mutters, "The Scarecrow walks at midnight. I read it in a book." Jody thinks he's making a joke, but like all Goosebumps kids, in retrospect, it wasn't a joke at all. Grandpa Kurt and Grandma Miriam meet the kids at the farm, sharing hugs, making small talk, etc. Mark complains that they still don't have cable yet. No MTV! They eat lunch and keep talking. Jody stares at her grandparents, noticing how much they've changed since just last year. Kurt has a noticeable limp now, and they're both just slower and quieter. The effects of aging, it seems. Miriam brings up that they should see Stanley's custom-made scarecrows, and it seems that Kurt wants to change the subject. He eventually tells the kids to let Stanley give them a tour of the farm again. Always so fun. There's a guest house where Stanley lives, and he even has a teenage son named Styx, though it seems he's out at town right now. Eventually they make it to the cornfield, and Jody notices a bunch of scarecrows when last year there was only one. She asks Stanley why he made so many, but he ignores her. He goes to grab an ear of corn to check if they're ready, and what Jody saw made her scream. A bunch of brown worms are squirming all over the corn. Very bad luck, Stanley says. It's written in his book of superstitions. Now, to be honest, I don't know if this is even actually an omen, as this is just a case of corn earworms destroying their crops. Stanley seems to think so, though, and Jody tries to have him calm down by changing the subject to seeing the scarecrows. He leads them to one, and with its black coat, burlap sack head, and painted-on frown, it's pretty scary. Stanley repeats his phrase, "The Scarecrow walks at midnight," because the book taught him how to make them walk. He made them walk last week, and now he's the boss. I'm sure we can all tell where this is going, but it's only chapter 3, so let's just see. But then, one of the scarecrows reaches out and chokes Jody. Jody turns around to see that Stanley and Mark really don't give a damn about what's happening. That's because it's actually just Styx messing with her. Styx is 16, and he's so lanky that he got the nickname Styx. He always calls Jody and Mark the city kids, and he has an abrasive yet lonely personality. Stanley keeps going off about there being spirits in the field, the corn have ears and such, so Styx mutters to Jody that things are different around here, but with Stanley keeping an eye on him, he doesn't explain further. Dinner comes, and it's true that times really have changed. Kurt, who used to tell stories nonstop, now sits in silence at the table. Miriam, too, quieter than usual. It's like there's a tension in the room that the kids don't know about. After dinner, the grandparents sit in their respective chairs, Sticks leaves, and the kids sit on the couch. There's an 8-foot-tall stuffed brown bear at the end of the room, and Kurt mentions how he saved 2 people when he killed it. That thing kinda creeps Jody out, so she asks Kurt for a new scary story. He says that he just wants to go to bed and doesn't really know any stories. Something's definitely wrong here. Upstairs, Jody changes into a nightshirt to get ready for bed. She looks out the window over the cornfield to see a dozen or so scarecrows posted outside. She remembers what Stanley said, but it's only 10 p.m. She'll be asleep if the statement was extremely literal and strict with his timing. But then they start to twitch. She yells for Mark to come over and look. The scarecrows, all in unison, seems to start struggling to rip themselves free of their stakes. They go to run downstairs to tell the grandparents, but they're already asleep, so they'll have to wait till morning. Jody locks the window in her room as the scarecrows still twitch, barely managing to sleep overnight. In the morning, Mark wakes up excited for pancakes. Jody remembers how Miriam makes the best chocolate chip pancakes ever, the anticipation overriding her fear from last night. So they make it to the kitchen table and cornflakes. Miriam says she stopped making pancakes. Too fattening. She looks at Stanley as she says that. Stanley says there's nothing like cornflakes in the morning. As he goes for a second bowl, totally not as fattening as a pancake. Jody remembers Styx's statement that things are different here, and that's true, but why? Jody mentions the scarecrows and Miriam gasps. Kurt seems to give Stanley a stern look when he says it was just the wind, needing to confirm that it's true. The subject changes when he tells Stanley to take the kids fishing at the creek. Jody asks if Miriam's doing anything later, but when she turns around, her hand is made of straw. Okay, well that would be quite the reveal. She's just holding a broom. Jody scolds herself for the mistake, blaming her allergies for seeing things. Later, they go fishing with Stanley. He's got this cartoonish picnic basket and swings it around, smiling about how Miriam packed all of his favorites. He starts walking around the barn, leading the kids with him. His book says they need to circle the barn 3 times for good luck, so they do it. He really is attached to this book. It's crazy. Mark mentions he'd like to give the book a read too, but Stanley says it's very hard, even for him. But now they're finally at the creek. Standing in the shallow end, they start to fish. And wait. And Jody's mind starts to wander. She thinks about the scarecrows again, and one of them reaches out of the water. She falls on her back, another hallucination, as it was just a clump of weeds. Stanley and Mark laugh, but Jody gives Mark a stare that shows she'll beat the shit out of him if he says anything. They didn't bring a towel, so Jody angrily shakes the water out as best she can. Meanwhile, Stanley mentions the fish might be better further down, and Mark follows him beyond view. Effectively alone now, Jody hears a crackling sound, footsteps, rustling. It must be Styx, she thinks, and yells out to him to show she isn't scared. But it isn't Styx. It's a whole damn scarecrow. Shoulder grab, it's Stanley. He and Mark heard her yelling and came over. She yells that it was a scarecrow, which causes Stanley to go slack-jawed. She points to where it is, but it's gone. Stanley looks confused, scared even, asking if it was true. Jody starts to doubt herself for his sake. Maybe it was just the shadows. It doesn't work though. Stanley starts freaking out, saying he has to read his book, and runs away. Jody goes to follow, leaving lazy Mark here to take the fishing rods back to the house. She runs to the cornfield and finds all the scarecrows perfectly still, and Stanley running straight inside his guest house. She decides to tell Kurt about this and notices someone moving inside the barn. She goes towards it, telling Kurt she wants to talk to him. The light gets even darker as she sees the barn door begin to slide shut behind her. She starts pounding on the door, crying for help, but it won't open. She takes a moment to breathe and starts to feel a little bit better, but then, footsteps. She cries out to the sound, but there's no reply. It moves towards her and she backs up into something, a ladder. She climbs up it and listens, still hearing the scraping footsteps. She sees the window on the hayloft and remembers a heavy rope that she and Mark would always use to swing down. With that escape route locked in, she looks to the ground outside the window and screams again. It's one of the scarecrows standing outside of the door. It hears her scream, then hobbles its way around the barn. Jody doesn't even know if what she's seeing is real right now, but she grabs the rope and swings down anyway. In this moment, her curiosity overcomes fear, and she runs to go see if it was real. She goes so fast she ends up bumping right into Styx. Seeing his attire, she's solved this whole mystery. It was Styx the whole time. Just another mean set of tricks to fool the city kids, Jody thinks. She accuses him of all of it, making sure to mention it scared his dad too. He denies it all, but at the mention of Stanley being scared, he runs off to find him. He might do something terrible. It takes until dinner for both Styx and Stanley to show up again. Stanley tells Jody not to tell Kurt about the scarecrow or it'll upset him, and he'll take care of him himself, tapping on his book of superstitions. During dinner, people don't really talk, but Stanley just keeps reading the book as he eats, muttering the words out loud. The grandparents don't even seem to notice it, and for dessert, Miriam lays out a cherry pie. That's weird. Doesn't Kurt like apple pie?
Too early in the year for apples.
When the hell is it ever too early for apples? Isn't Kurt allergic to cherries?
Everyone loves cherries. It's even Stanley's favorite.
Yeah, definitely something's up with this farm. Again, Kurt refuses to tell any stories, glancing over at Stanley. He says he's run out. Mark and Jody go upstairs and wonder why the hell is everything so different, except for Sticks. But he's an asshole, so they don't care for him. Going to bed, Jody notices 3 jagged cracks in the ceiling, and I can only assume that will be relevant. It's not. She can't fall asleep and starts hearing the scratching again. A figure climbs up to the window and blocks the light. It slips into the room and Jody can see it. Grandpa Kurt, but he's made out of straw. He looks down at her with a cold, expressionless face. She jumps out of bed and stumbles to the door to escape. When she opens the door, she runs out and into Miriam, except her face is painted on. She's not real. Then Kurt's straw hands cover Jody's face. Jody wakes up choking, her face smothered under her own pillow. A nightmare, and she wakes up right before sunrise. She takes her allergy medicine and goes downstairs, meeting both Mark and Miriam in the kitchen. They ask for pancakes again, but Miriam says she's entirely forgotten how to make them. Kurt and Stanley have went off, somewhere, but they got Betsy and Maggie ready, the old gray mares, so the kids could go riding, and they do just that. They ride silently past the Scarecrows, keeping the promise not to talk about them, until they both get the urge to speed up. But then a figure leaps out. Betsy whinnies and Jody falls, but not before seeing a Scarecrow dead ahead. She falls right onto her back, the pain so abrupt, and then black. Still with her eyes shut, she struggles to call out to Mark. His voice is just as weak as hers. He says he fell too, and he might have a broken wrist. She opens her eyes. The sky blurs as she tries to focus, when a hand obscures her view. The Scarecrow! Another shoulder grab, and when the blurry vision clears away, Stanley is behind this one as well. He helps them out, and he gets onto the horse with Mark to help him get back to the barn safely. Before heading back, though, Jody kicks the Scarecrow from before, which is just laying on the ground. It doesn't move, just as expected, so Styx has to be behind this. But they could have been killed. Why would he do that? Later at lunch, the kids eat food and Mark is given ice on his wrist, and luckily it's just a sprain. Styx and Stanley are out at town, so the kids take this time to divulge everything about the Scarecrows, and their current belief that Styx is the one behind it. Despite the clear near-death experience these kids just had, Kurt and Miriam just smile and pass it off as Styx and his little jokes. After lunch, Mark goes to watch one of the 3 channels on TV, and Jody goes to confront Styx when the car arrives. She doesn't find him outside, so she heads to the guest house. Not there either. Maybe the barn? She walks into the dark barn and notices something she didn't before. A pile of black coats and painted burlap sacks. Supplies to make more Scarecrows, as if there weren't enough already. Something else is in the corner too, at least a dozen torches, along with a bottle of kerosene. Before she can form a thought though, the scraping sound is back. Styx clad in the deep shadows of the barn. I warned you. He clarifies. He tried to warn them to go back home. He's not trying to scare them, and he has no idea about the Scarecrow he supposedly threw onto the path earlier. The conversation's interrupted when Stanley appears, and Styx quietly whispers that he has to go, and leaves with his dad. Alone now, Jody's convinced that Styx is just a liar. Time for revenge! She tells Mark the plan, which he loves because he doesn't even need to use his busted wrist. And so the plan is thus. She'll dress Mark up like a Scarecrow, get Styx's attention, and when he comes near Mark, he'll start to move, and it'll scare the shit out of him. An easy and foolproof plan, surely. They make their way through the cornfield. The last piece they need is a hat from one of the Scarecrows. They grab one and put it onto Mark. Now he must stand still, alone, until Jody brings Styx back. She goes to the guest house, but can't see Styx inside. Just as she's about to knock, a Scarecrow appears behind her. It must be Mark, so she yells at him to get back before ruining the plan. But he doesn't listen. He grabs her by the shoulders. That's not Mark! The guest house door swings open and out comes Styx. He tackles the Scarecrow onto the ground, revealing that the Scarecrow is in fact walking at midnight. Baffled by this revelation, Jody listens to Styx's exposition dump. A little before the kids arrived, Stanley read an incantation from his Book of Superstitions, which brought the Scarecrows to life. Now, I have no idea if they're even malicious, but the Scarecrows scared them so bad that the grandparents begged Stanley to put them back to sleep. He only did so on a few conditions, that they never laugh at him again, and they always do what he wants them to. That's why they've been acting so strange, only making his food or not telling scary stories. They're trying to keep Stanley happy. The only problem is, as we can clearly tell, recasting the spell didn't put all the Scarecrows back to sleep. Sticks wants to keep this a secret from his dad for fear that he might freak out, and unfortunately for him, the door to the guest house swings open again, and he clearly sees the Scarecrow's body on the ground. This sends him into a frenzy. He starts yelling, "The Scarecrows walk!" and then he must take charge of all of them. Sticks catches up to Stanley and tries to calm him down, that all the Scarecrows are still sleeping, and he doesn't need to say the words. Sufficiently calmed, this is the moment where Mark decides to walk out of the cornfield. Stanley screams and starts to run again. Sticks runs after, and Jody trips on a hole in the ground with Mark right behind her. He's completely lost as to what's happening, and the time it took Jody to recover means they've lost sight of the other two. Soon they hear Stanley yelling the incantation as loud as he can and move towards the sound of his voice. Where's Sticks? Why couldn't he stop Stanley? Gotta say, I admire Stanley's ability to read this well in the dark. Impressive stuff. But anyway, they find the two standing in front of two unmoving Scarecrows, Sticks frozen for some reason as Stanley keeps chanting. He slams the book and exclaims they'll all come to life again, which is exactly the opposite of what I thought he wanted, but maybe he wanted them to be all alive so he could exert control all over them? I really don't know. A few moments pass and nothing happens. Stanley mopes about how the chant didn't work and Sticks comes back to life happy that it didn't. But then, the scratching begins. The two Scarecrows lower themselves to the ground. Sticks yells at the kids to warn Kurt and Miriam. They see all the Scarecrows previously kept still beginning to drop down. They rush over the main house, finding their grandparents in the backyard. They explain everything, especially the fact that Mark's costume he's stuck in was meant for Sticks, not Stanley. Stanley and Sticks emerge from the cornfield as Miriam holds on to Jody for dear life. Stanley calls out for help, but what the hell are they gonna do? Stanley starts screaming over and over about how they won't obey him, and Kurt has to grab him and ask him how many times what the book says you have to do exactly to get them to obey you. He doesn't know. Great. He starts yelling at the Scarecrows to obey him, but nothing changes. Before they all die, Jody does something so surprising it will blow your mind. She sneezes. The power of this sneeze must have been so insane because it caused Mark to jump away in fear. But somehow, all of the other Scarecrows follow suit. Jody tells Mark to raise his hand, and all of the Scarecrows follow. For some reason, they're all following his lead. Sticks tells his dad to cast the chant to put them back to sleep while he can, but he's too scared. Jody has a new idea. Rip your head off! Not literally, of course, but the burlap mask. If he does that, all the other Scarecrows will do it too. It goes exactly as planned, until it doesn't. The Scarecrows don't need a central nervous system, so taking off their heads does nothing. They start moving again, and now they don't copy anything Mark does. Miriam deduces that's because he isn't wearing the burlap mask anymore. They don't consider him their leader. So, put it back on? It must be too late though, as the group of Scarecrows start to smother everybody. Jody yells out to Sticks, but he's gone! She manages to poke her head out to see two blazing torches in the hands of Sticks. The ones from the barn, which he says he was saving as a last resort. He starts swinging them like clubs, lighting each Scarecrow on fire easily. Luckily, none of them bump into the cornfield or the building, and they all crumple to ash eventually. The next day, the grandparents are napping, Mark is outside reading comics, and Sticks is in town to get some mail. Stanley is somehow still allowed to have this book, but he mutters that he'll never read the Scarecrow stuff again. And so Jody's alone on the couch, still hearing the mutterings of Stanley from the kitchen, still seeing that enormous stuffed bear start to blink, then move. Stanley, I have to say, for the most part, this book was amazing. The wiki says that Stein describes this as one of his scariest, and I'm inclined to agree, though the source for that statement is suspiciously missing. My only main issue of this book is Stanley. It's this strangely nuanced thing where they kind of treat him like Lenny in Of Mice and Men, where he's an older man with some clear learning disabilities and the mind of a child. With that in mind, you can give excuses for him, because otherwise, he'd be easily hateable. I mean, he blackmails the grandparents into doing his bidding, he flip-flops on whether he wants to keep the Scarecrows alive under his control or asleep, and he's too scared to even try to do anything himself. It's not like he can't be forgiven. He clearly has issues, and being laughed at by the grandparents before made him take drastic measures he didn't even think about the consequences to. But they could have at least destroyed the book. There's no sequel here. Odds are Jody's about to get mauled by a bear about a page past the ending. In all other senses, this book had great tension, a great setting, a rarely used horror trope of Scarecrows. Like, guys, I was lucky enough that Zardy's maze existed so I could find a relevant enough game to play for the background footage. I wasn't going to dare try and beat the Friday Night Funkin' mod of his. It also reminds me of Friday the 13th Part 2, a comfort series of mine. But with all that said, there is still an episode to tackle, so let's see if it can get the same high praise. Everything starts relatively the same, though now Styx is with them to help carry the kids' luggage. Oh, and Stanley drops the most obvious hint towards the plot when Mark talks about catching frogs.
I like those frogs. You shouldn't catch them, because if you do, the Scarecrows might just end up catching you.
At night it starts raining, and they try and divert you away from blaming Stanley because Kurt and Miriam freak out about if the doors and windows are locked. Of course, if they were still under the impression from the book that Stanley's keeping them asleep, there shouldn't be a problem. Those fears were reasonable, though, because the Scarecrow immediately shows up to try and break into the house. In the morning, we get one of our cornflake pancake deflection scenes, and you can clearly tell how Stanley seems to be holding them hostage.
I'm afraid I forgot to buy chocolate chips.
Mark absolutely nails this baseball into the cornfield, and they have trouble finding it, until they come across the Scarecrow. Stanley jump scares the kids to give his Scarecrow Walks at Midnight line, and Styx does his own scare technique. He also gives the most nonchalant warning ever.
This isn't any place for city kids. You two should have never come out here.
At night, Mark is the first one to see the Scarecrows move now and makes Jody look. She thinks it's just the wind, though, making her a lot less scared than before. Jody gets lost in the day and runs into Styx in the barn. A lot less frightening, but that doesn't stop Jody's subpar acting.
You're always trying to scare us. I know it was you on the field, okay?
At night, we get our cherry pie incident and lack of scary stories, both clearly showing that Stanley's behind this. Jody actually has the Scarecrow nightmare from the book, and while it's a lot more funny looking, I commend the makeup team. Now the kids go on a bike ride through the cornfield, because I assumed that the production team didn't want to pay for all the hassle that comes with riding a horse. The Scarecrow actually tackles Jody this time and starts to beat the shit out of her, but then he goes limp. Jody even kicks his head off, but he disappears fast. We go right to the plan to scare Styx, and when Styx saves Jody, he actually brings her inside. We get some extra exposition, that Stanley tried to bring the Scarecrows to life to help with farming, but that didn't work out. And at least Styx believes that the blackmail Stanley's doing is 1, because he's a farmhand all his life and wanted control, and 2, he's slow in the mind, so he just gets confused sometimes. He probably shouldn't have given out this backstory so loud in his own home, which gets Stanley scared. The show plays out mostly the same from now on. Stanley brings them to life, though instead of wanting to wake them up, Styx says he read the wrong spell. Also, my jaw dropped at this next set of lines.
Where's the barn? It's too dark. We're lost. Jody, I'm scared.
The group flees to the barn, disregarding the grandparents, and they have an all-out battle. Mark turns on the thresher, which grinds up each of the Scarecrows and saves everybody. With all that back to normal, Stanley finds a random page on the ground and reads it. This brings the thresher to life, and well, they all die now, I guess? This episode was not as good as the book at all, in my opinion. Disregarding the poor acting, the cuts for time here were numerous. You couldn't really feel tension building, imagining if the Scarecrows were alive or not, or why the grandparents were acting so strangely. It was clear as day here. The ending is also completely different, which I won't completely knock it for, because I'm sure having to deal with the risks of burning a bunch of stuff down weren't worth it, just like the horses. The thresher was a creative way to fix the issue, though I do wish they incorporated the they follow the leader sort of thing here too. The new ending with the thresher coming to life reminds me of Maximum Overdrive. What do you think is harder to stop, a thresher or a live bear? So did this book make you never want to go to the farm again? Did it work as an advertisement for the Field of Screams? But what's scarier than living scarecrows? Worms? Sure! Make sure to subscribe because in 2 weeks, go eat worms!